Good evening. Tonight we're going to continue on with Lesson 5. I can model the equivalence of tenths and hundredths using the area model and place value disks. So guys, we're just like when we did with our fractions, we're going to be looking at something like 4 tenths is equivalent to 40 hundredths. Another way of saying that for decimals is 0.4 tenths is equal as 0 and 40 hundredths. Those are equivalent. Okay, so here's a problem. We have 0.2, which really is 0 and 2 tenths, which is equal to the fraction 2 over 10, which is 2 tenths. Well, how would that look like if we were to shade this in? Well, the first one would be 1 tenth and 2 tenths. So we have shaded in 2 tenths. Another way to look at this is if we wanted to find the equivalent fraction, is that we could split this in to a half and cut this up into different rows. Okay, now that we split this up into two sections we have 10 rows in there. We have now made an equivalent fraction of 20 hundredths. We didn't draw or color in more red boxes. They were already there. But since we made another group of 10, we now change this section right here into no longer 2. It's now 20, which is in the numerator. And now it's no longer out of 10, it's out of 100. So basically, what did we do to the numerator and to the denominator? What did we put in to get to 2 times what gives us 20? Well, we multiplied by 10. And we get 10 gets us to 100. We multiply by 10 to get us to 100. So there was one way of finding an equivalent fraction. So what does 20 over 100 look like as a decimal? No holes. Oops. We got 20 hundredths. The 0 is in the hundredths place. Now we can actually go in reverse with this. And we have 0 and 20 hundredths is 20 over 100. But what's another way of finding an equivalent fraction? Well, we can bring us back down to, because an equivalent fraction of 20 hundredths is 2 tenths. So how did we get from 20 to 2? Well, we are going to divide the top by, by a 10, and we get a 2. And whatever we do to the top, we got to do the bottom. Divide that by 10, and we get 10 in the denominator. So there's another way of showing an equivalent fraction by using division, or we could use multiplication to find an equivalent fraction. We have 4 tenths, and we want to get the denominator to 100, and then we're going to need to change the numerator. We're going to model this using these models. We're first showing what 4 tenths is going to look like. So let's shade it in. We have 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths. And so what we did, we're going to use multiplication, and we want to find an equivalent fraction of 4 tenths. We are going to multiply the top by a 10 and the bottom by a 10. And we do 10 times 10 is 100. 4 times 10 is 40. And that's what this shows right here. But now, what about if we made and we focused on this side, which is split up into hundredths? Because that's what we have here, 40 hundredths. So let's model that. Well, let's color it in. 1, 2, oh boy. It's going to take a little bit here. We have to make 40 of these. So right now I'm just finishing up my 30. And here is my last one. My 40. Okay, so we have 40 hundredths. And there's my 2 examples. I just modeled both. But if I wanted to go back and show you again, if I wanted to simplify or find the equivalent fraction to 40 hundredths using division, we can do that. We divide the top and the bottom by 10, and we're going to get 4 tenths, just like we did over here, but we used multiplication. Again, using division and multiplication to help find equivalent fractions and decimals. So if we say 4 tenths, what does that look like as a decimal? It is no holes, and 4 is in the tenths. 40 hundredths, no holes, and 0 is in the hundredths place. Okay, continuing on, 60 hundredths, and we're going to be using division to find the equivalent fraction with tenths in the denominator. So let's start coloring this in, and we've got, we need to show 60 out of 100. Okay, so 60. Right now we have just colored in 20. Now we're showing 30. Going on to 40. And our last one. And that's going to be our 60. So that's showing 60. This is showing, oops, oh boy. This is showing 60 hundredths. And then we want to make that into tenths. Well, how do we do that? Well, we're going to divide the top and the bottom by 10. And we get 10 in the denominator because 10 goes into 100 10 times. 60 divided by 10 is 6. So this now becomes 6 tenths. So this side is going to represent 6 tenths. And they are equivalent fractions or decimals. 0 and 60 hundredths, 0 and 6 tenths. Complete the number sentences. Shade the equivalent amount of the area model. Draw horizontal lines to make hundredths. So we've got 36 hundredths. So we want to break that in to show how many tenths and then how many hundredths. And then we want to make that into a decimal form and then a fraction form. So in 36 hundredths, how many tenths do we have? We've got 3, we have 3 tenths, and in the hundredths, we have 6 hundredths. How does that look like as a decimal? Well, we do not have any ones, no holes. Decimal, 36, 3 in the tenths, 6 in the hundredths, so it's 36 hundredths. As a fraction, we know that 36 is in the numerator and it's out of 100, 36 hundredths. And how is that going to look like when we model it? Well, if we model it, we're going to show 3 tenths. And then with that 4th tenths, we're not going to color in because it's not 40. We got to cut that into tenths. That 1 tenth we're going to cut into again to show 6. All right, so now I just cut in that next tenth into another tenths. And we're going to shade in, because 10 times 10 is 100. So I just made 100ths in there. And we are going to shade in 6 of those. So we've got 1, got to get that bucket. 1, 2, 3, we got 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got to do a better job of making these a little tight so they don't slip through. All right, so we've got 4, and we've now got 5 and 6. So this represents 36 hundredths. Okay, just when we started the lesson, I told you about the place value disc and that we're going to be using them. And these are examples of place value discs. Each one of those discs is equal to 1 hundredth, right? 1 hundredths. So this becomes Whoops. This becomes 1/100th. And this one becomes 2/100ths. And so now we have 20/100ths. And we've got 4 over here. So this is representing 24/100ths. So if we have 24/100ths, how many tenths are in 24/100ths? We have 2 tenths, because the 2 is in the tenths place, and the 4 is in the hundreds place. If we wanted to look at that closer, we do not have any holes, and here is 24/100ths. Looking at that 2, what place is that 2 in? Well, it's in the tenths place, so it becomes 2 tenths. This 4 is in the hundreds place, so it is 4/100ths. So that's how it would look like as a fraction. 13/100ths. Okay, let's convert this and show the equivalent of a decimal. We do not have any holes. We have our decimal point. We see that the 1 is going to be in the tenths place, and then we have 3 in the hundreds place, so that's 13/100ths. How many tenths do we have in that? We've got 1/10, because that's what this 1 represent, 1/10. And then that 3 is in the hundreds place, so we have 3/100ths. So if we were to break this down here, let's show this as a decimal, 0 and 13/100ths. We have 1/10 as a fraction, and then that 3 is the 3/100ths. The next one is a little tricky, because that is 0.90, right? That 0 is in the hundreds place, so that would really be equal to 90/100ths. All right, which is the same as how many tenths, where the 9 is in the tenths place, so it would be equal to 9/10. So if we took this 0 and 90/100ths, we would know that that 9 is in the tenths, so that would be 9/10. And we'd see that 0 is in the hundreds, so there's 0/100ths. There's nothing in the hundreds. So really what that would be equal to is 9/10, because there's nothing in the hundreds place. We could also use division to find the equivalent fraction here. Divide the top and the bottom by 10, like we've been doing. And that's equal to 9 in the numerator. 10 goes into 100 10 times. So there's our 9/10. All right, 6/10 and 3/100ths. Now we're giving it in unit form, and we got to put this into a fraction and to a decimal. Well, we have 6/10, so we know that the 6 is going to be in the tenths place. And the 3 is going to be in the hundredths place. So what would that look like as a fraction? 63/100ths. So if we were to look at this decimal here, how many tenths do we have? We have 6/10. Plus what we've got in the hundredths, we've got 3/100ths. All right, let's see if you can rock this assignment out. Good luck. Okay, the first problem tonight, 4/100. I want it in decimal form and then in unit form. 0.03, I would want that into a fraction and then into a unit form. So take that decimal, turn it into a fraction, and give it to me in unit form. 7/10. I'm giving you as a fraction. I want you to give me the equivalent decimal to that, and then in unit form. All right, here we have some place value discs. And then figuring out how much is in the place value discs, I would like you to come down here and complete this number sentence, this unit number sentence. How many hundredths is equal to how many tenths plus how many hundredths. that would represent these place value discs right here. That's right. We had a rockin' good time tonight. Have a wonderful night, guys.